Okay, so here's your challenge. And this is actually a challenge that incorporates a little bit of debugging, not just talking about state specifically. So you're given an incomplete class-based component that doesn't have a constructor, and your job is to essentially initialize state and make sure that the component gets fixed. Pay attention to the console, which I've opened in the bottom, so make sure you look at that, and that should give you some good hints as to what's wrong. And for the values of state, you should be able to figure those out based on the context of this component. So go ahead, give this a shot, and we will do this together in just a few seconds. Okay, so there's a lot to be done here, and I'm going to start first by adding a method that this return can be inside. It looks kind of like this was a functional component and was changed haphazardly to a class-based component, but incompletely. So the first thing I'm going to do is add a render method that this return live inside. Okay, so when I refresh this, you'll see it says component is not defined. Well, that's a pretty helpful hint. We either need to extend react.component, or we need to import component from React. If we do it this way, then I can actually keep it as component. Either way is totally legitimate. The next error we're going to run into is a little bit tricky. So I'm going to save this. Notice it says cannot set property props of undefined. Well, that's pretty confusing because we're not actually using props anywhere here. And where this comes from is this little set of parentheses that shouldn't be there. That's how a function is defined, but not a class. So I'm going to get rid of those and save it again. You'll see cannot read property name of null. Well, here's name, and it's saying that this dot state is null. So as the instructions say, I'm going to create a constructor method. And first thing we should always do in a constructor method is add super. And I'm going to initialize my state. State is an object. And I can see from the render method that that object should have a name property and an age property. So inside this object, I will add a name property, and we'll say Sally. An age of 13. Try saving again. Now have a functioning component. There's no errors in the console, and Sally and 13 years old are showing up correctly over in the browser. Now, one thing we've been talking a lot about at vSchool, which is the coding bootcamp that I work for, is how important repetition is. And I know I've tried to get you to write this code over and over again, but I'd highly recommend that if any part of this was confusing at all, that you go back to the beginning of the screencast and you pause the video immediately and you try to fix it yourself again. And then after you do that, do it again. Go back to the beginning, try and fix it again from scratch, and do it again. And do that as many times as it takes for the syntax to kind of be second nature for you. Doing that is going to do a number of things, but mainly it's going to make it so that in the future you don't get so hung up on figuring out and remembering the syntax as much as figuring out how to solve specific problems. So feel free to stop here, go back, redo this as many times as is necessary, And then when you're ready, feel free to move on.